Welcome to part two of lesson two, international trade, silver flows, and the Opium Wars. By the 1700s, Britain's demand for Chinese tea, along with silk and porcelain, had skyrocketed. These imports were financed almost entirely with silver, since Chinese merchants under the Qing dynasty had little interest in British manufactured goods. This trade structure created a persistent trade deficit for Britain, measured in the amount of silver sent to China. For every chest of tea purchased, silver left British coffers and entered China. In the 18th century, China demanded silver for its exports because it was a universally accepted, stable store of value that aligned with the country's monetary system and fiscal needs. Under the Ming and Qing dynasties, silver served as a primary medium for exchange and taxation, making it more useful than foreign goods, which Chinese consumers largely ignore due to their strong domestic industries. Additionally, Chinese leaders favored accumulating silver to maintain monetary stability and state power, much like European mercantilists. Requiring silver also allowed China to control foreign trade, limit foreign influence, and preserve economic sovereignty under the tightly regulated Canton system. In the 18th century, Britain's large trade deficit with China, financed by silver, posed serious economic and strategic risk. The persistent outflow of silver depleted the nation's monetary reserves, reducing the domestic money supply, constraining credit and public spending, and increasing vulnerability to deflation and financial crisis. It also pressured the exchange rate and weakened confidence in the British pound. This dependence on the limited silver reserves created strategic fragility, especially during wartime. To reverse the silver drain, Britain pursued exploitative solutions like the opium trade, leading to moral and geopolitical conflict. Ultimately, the deficit revealed deeper structural weaknesses in Britain's trade competitiveness. We analyze the international tea trade using supply and demand models, where price P is measured in ounces of silver per pound of tea and quantity Q in pounds of tea. To understand trade between the UK and China, we compare how their markets clear with and without trade barriers. We assume the British developed a strong taste for tea before China cut off trade with the UK. In response, the UK began growing tea on farms in its colonies, most likely in Assam and Darjeeling, India. Since China had cultivated tea for centuries, it had perfected the process, producing lower cost, better tasting tea. Because the East India Company held a monopoly on tea imports into the UK and was the largest purchaser of Chinese tea, controlling much of the supply and distribution within Britain, it preferred importing Chinese tea due to its higher quality and lower production cost. For China, the model is given here in red. For the UK, the model is here given in black. On the left is supply because it's upward sloping. On the right is demand because it's downward sloping. And the same thing goes for the UK. In figure one, the two models are graphed together with the red lines corresponding to China and the black lines corresponding to UK. I've already clicked on this Desmos link to open the models in Desmos. I'm going to use my values in the table below to create my version of this model. P is negative 50, M is 0.1, C is negative 40.9, capital C is 59.9, lowercase b is negative 8.9, and capital B is 45.9. I'm going to just double check to make sure they're correct. 40.9, 59.9, 8.9, and 45.9. With no trade occurring between China and the UK, find the equilibrium prices and quantities in the two different markets. To do this, for China, click the intersection of the two red lines in your Desmos.com worksheet. Click the two black lines to find UK's. The first number of each point is the equilibrium quantity of tea, while the second number is the price of tea in ounces of silver. In China, the domestic price is 9.5, and the quantity is 504, and 18.5 in the UK. Chinese suppliers produce 504 pounds of tea demanded by Chinese citizens, while Britain's colony in India supplies 274 pounds of tea demanded by British subjects. Because the tea grown in the new farms of the UK's India colony is higher priced, and UK subjects prefer the taste of Chinese tea, the UK and China agreed to a free trade agreement, assuming the cost of transporting tea from India and China is the same, and the spoilage and theft that occur are the same from both locations. The tea prices in China and the UK will eventually equalize. When that happens, the world tea trade has reached the equilibrium world price. Line 1 of your Desmos.com worksheet is the world price. Change P equaled -50 to China's domestic price you found above, 9.5. To find the following answers, click the points where the green line intersects the black lines and the red lines. The first number of each point is the quantity of tea. At that world price, China tea producers supply what? The world tea price is 9.5, the height of the green line. The green line intersects the red lines at a single point. The world price is 9.5 and a quantity of 504. So China tea producers supply 504 pounds of tea as Chinese consumers demand 504 pounds of tea. The difference in those two values equals 0 pounds, which is the amount of tea China exports to the UK and the amount the UK imports from China. Meanwhile, the UK's colony in India supplies. To find that number, we have to find where the world price touches the black supply curve in the UK, which is 184. At this world price, UK subjects demand 364 pounds of tea. Because the quantity that is demanded and the quantity that is supplied are different, there's a shortage of tea in the UK. I opened up a new Desmos.com to find the difference. 364 minus 184. And it looks like the shortage is 180 pounds tea. Because the world price is too low to induce trade between China and the UK, British subjects will bid up the world price. As a result, the world price is bumped by 1 ounce of silver per pound of tea. Change line 1 of your Desmos.com worksheet to P equal 10.5. At the new world price, China tea producers supply what? I want to click on the intersection of the red supply curve in China and the green world price line. It says 514 pounds of tea is produced in China. Chinese consumers demand. To find that quantity, you want to click on the red demand curve in China and its intersection with the green line. So the quantity demanded is 494. The difference in those two values equals, so 514 minus 494, it equals 20 pounds of tea that China exports to the UK. The difference is also the pounds of tea the UK imports from China. Meanwhile, the UK's colony in India supplies how many pounds of tea? To find out, we click on the intersection of the green world price and the black supply curve, and it's 194. Adding that to the pounds of tea the UK imports from China, so we have 194 plus 20, is the amount of tea consumed by British subjects, which equals 214. With that and British subjects demanding, well, to find that value, you have to use the world price and then click on the demand curve where it intersects UK demand. So British subjects are demanding 354 pounds of tea. The difference between the 354 that is demanded in the UK and the 194 plus the 20 pounds that are imported from China, that gives the shortage in the UK. 354 minus 214 is 140 pounds. British subjects will further bid up the world price. As a result, the world price is bumped up an additional ounce of silver. So we're going to change the price, the world price, to 11.5. At the new world price, China tea producers supply what? At the new world tea price of 11.5 per pound, the green line, intersects Chinese supply at 524. Chinese consumers demand 484 pounds of tea. And the difference in those two values, 524 minus 484, is the amount that China exports to the UK, 40. It is also the amount of tea that UK imports from China. Meanwhile, the UK's colony in India supplies what? Well, this is the supply of UK tea, and it intersects the world price of 11.5 at 204 pounds. So UK brings in 204 pounds of tea from India. Adding the 204 pounds of tea to the 40 pounds that is imported to the UK from China is a total UK supply of 244 pounds of tea. At the world price of 11.5, that green line intersects UK demand at 344 pounds of tea. So the British demand 344 pounds of tea. And the shortage has now become 100. 344 minus 244. British subjects continue to bid up the price until there is no shortage of tea in the UK. When this happens, the world tea market has reached its equilibrium. To find the equilibrium world price, change line 1 of your decimal worksheet until the values in line 7 of 8 of this worksheet are equal to each other. So right now, these two are different. The 140 is this difference, 344 minus 204, and the 40 is that difference. We want to increase the price of tea until those two numbers are equal. So let's try 12.5, 13.5, 14.5. 14.5, we overshot it. So let's go 14. At a world price of 14, the amount exported from China to UK is this difference, 549 minus 459. That difference is 90. That is exported to the UK. This difference, which is 90, is how much is needed to close the shortage at the world price. At the equilibrium world price of 14 ounces of silver, China producers will produce 549 pounds of tea. At that world price of 14, Chinese consumers demand 459 pounds of tea. The difference in those two values is 90, and it equals the amount that is exported to the UK. That difference is also the pounds of tea the UK imports from China. Meanwhile, the UK's colony in India is supplying what? In India, 229 pounds are produced and then distributed in the UK. 229. Adding that to the pounds of tea the UK imports from China is the amount of tea consumed by British subjects. 229 plus 90, 319. British subjects are demanding 319 pounds of tea. The difference between the amount that is being supplied within the UK, whether it's produced in India or produced in China, and the amount that is demanded by UK subjects means there's a shortage in the UK of 0 pounds of tea. Assuming the UK and China are only exchanging silver and tea at the world equilibrium price, the UK's trade deficit with China equals what? In the UK, exports equals 0 because it's not exporting any goods to China. We don't include the money flow in the trade balance, just products. If it was exporting 10 pounds of wool to China, then this would be 10. But they're not exporting anything to China. They are importing 90 pounds of tea from China. So in terms of units of goods, UK has a trade deficit of 90, but we got to value that in silver. And the price of each pound of tea is 14 ounces of silver. So we're going to multiply that by 14. So the UK's trade deficit with China equals 1,260 ounces of silver. China, on the other hand, is exporting 90 pounds of tea and importing no goods from the UK. And that is valued at a world price of 14 ounces of silver per pound of tea. So China's trade surplus with the UK is 1,260 ounces of silver. If the above international trade model represents the weekly demand for supply of tea in the UK and China, and the UK has a stock of silver equal to 117,180 ounces, when free trade begins with China, each week the UK loses 1,260 ounces of silver. If this continues for 52 weeks, holding all of the factors constant, the UK will have how many ounces of silver left? 1,260 times 52 is 62,520. We're going to subtract that from what they started with, 117,180 minus the 65,520 that left the country. That leaves the UK with 51,660 ounces of silver. If this continues for 93 weeks, holding all other factors constant, the UK will have how many ounces of silver left? Well, if it lasts for 93 weeks, I'm going to change that to 93. I'm going to change that to 117,180. It's going to have 0 ounces of silver left. The UK found this to be a problem. The Chinese did not. And this is kind of what's playing out on the world stage today. We see it with the United States and China, with the roles reversed between the West and China. And money is not silver, it's American dollars. Unlike the US today, the UK in the 1700s could not print new money. It could not print new silver. Today, the United States can have its central bank, the Federal Reserve, print money. That was not possible in the UK. Then, because silver was money and it had to be mined. The UK attempted several things to reverse the silver flows. The UK faced a growing economic challenge due to its trade imbalance with China, driven by insatiable demand for Chinese tea. Under the Qing dynasty, China operated a largely self-sufficient economy, producing its own food, clothes, tools, and luxury goods, which left little demand for British products like wool or manufactured goods. As a result, silver flowed out of the UK to China, as demonstrated in the above model. By the 1770s, the UK was importing about 3 million pounds sterling worth of tea annually from China, producing a UK trade deficit with China of the same amount. This placed significant pressure on the British East India Company, which managed trade through the restricted port of Canton, China. The trade deficit caused the 3 million pounds of sterling to flow from the UK to China. Use the following equation of exchange to compute the resulting inflation rates in China and in the UK, where M is the stock of money, V is the velocity of money, the number of times in a year that one unit of money is used to purchase final goods and services, P is the price level, the CPI in present-day USA, and Y is real gross domestic production, the value of national output. Before trade between China and the UK is established, assume following values. For China, the stock of money was 200 million taels. Velocity was 3. One tael is used 3 times in a year to purchase final goods and services in China, and national output was 800 million taels worth of goods and services, with one tael equal to 0.4 pounds sterling. China's stock of money was blank pounds of sterling. To find this answer, we need to convert 200 million taels of silver into pounds sterling. So we have 200 million taels of silver, and then one tael is 0.4 pounds sterling. So the taels and tael units cancel, and so what you're left with is 200 times 0.4. You're left with 80 million pounds sterling. So China's money was 80 million pounds sterling. We gotta do the same thing for its national output. So I'm gonna just change this 200 to 800, and we get 320 million pounds sterling. So using the equation of exchange up here, at the time it was not an equation. It said the value of national output was proportional to M. So the V and the equal sign, you can replace that with the proportional symbol. Later, velocity was introduced as the proportionality constant. So this was pretty advanced for the day. So the national output, Y, is 320, and China's money stock was 80 pounds sterling. To find the price level, we multiply the 3 times the 80 and divide that by 320. So we have 3 times 80 divided by 320. And we get 0.75. For the UK, assume the stock of money before free trade was 30 pounds sterling. Velocity was 4, meaning 1 pound sterling is used 4 times in a year to purchase final goods and services in the UK. And national output was 160 million pounds sterling worth of goods and services. So the UK's national output was 160 million pounds, and its money stock was 30 pounds of sterling. And so to find the price level in the UK, we have to take 4 times 30 and divide that by 160, and we get 0.75. So the price level in the UK before trade is established between China and the UK, 0.75. After trade between China and the UK is established, the amount of silver that flowed into China from the UK was 20 million taels. So 20 million taels enter the Chinese economy, flow into it. That's 8 million pounds sterling. We're going to add 8 to the 80. China's stock of money was 80 pounds sterling before trade between China and the UK. After, with 8 million pounds sterling flowing in, its new money stock is 80 plus 8, or 88. If we hold constant its GDP, and then we change the money stock from 80 to 88, we can solve this equation for P. So we have 3 times 88 divided by 320. And we get a price level of 0.825. For the UK, blank pounds of sterling flowed out from it to China. So we had 8 pounds sterling flowing out, resulting in a new money stock of what? Well, the money stock was 30 pounds sterling. 8 pounds flowed into China and out of the UK. 30 minus 8 is 22. So if we hold the UK's national output constant 160, and we change the money stock to 22, we can get the UK's price level. And it is equal to 4 times 22 divided by 160, 0.55. The free trade produces an inflation rate in China, but deflation in the UK. So let's calculate the inflation in China first. So the inflation in China, with all this money coming into it, it's 0.825 minus what it was, 0.75. And then we want to divide that by 0.75. So this is what the price level is after trade is established. This is what it was. So the inflation rate is what it is minus what it was divided by what it was times 100 to convert it to a percent. And so the inflation in China is 10%. What about the deflation in the UK? In the UK, the price level was 0.75, and it is now lower at 0.55. We're going to multiply that by 100 to turn it into a percent. So there's deflation in the UK. Prices are dropping by 26.667%. How many decimal places do we need? 2 decimal places. George III and his mercantilist advisors would have viewed deflation as deeply destabilizing. Falling prices discourage spending as consumers delay purchases expecting further declines. Merchants and producers face shrinking revenues against fixed costs and debts, leading to reduced profits, wage cuts, layoffs, and bankruptcies. Deflation also lowers incomes, eroding the tax base and limiting government funds for wars. That's the key. Colonial administration and public works. Moreover, it increases the real burden of debt, raising borrowing costs and stifling credit, investment, and entrepreneurship. Prolonged deflation thus threatens both economic vitality and political stability. Meanwhile, China's restrictive Canton system prioritized self-sufficiency. That sounds familiar. Today's American. Confining foreign trade to Canton and banning most imports, such as colonial American cotton and British wool, to protect domestic industries like silk. That again sounds familiar in today's America. Permitted imports were limited to luxury goods for the elite: glassware, clocks, scientific instruments, spices, gems, jewelry, amber, coral, and horses, often sourced via Central Asian overland routes or Southeast Asian maritime trade. The persistent outflow of silver to pay for Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain alarmed British policymakers who, guided by mercantilist principles, equated national power with precious metal reserves. Britain's inability to penetrate China's markets created a chronic balance of payments crisis, straining the East India Company's finances and threatening Britain's economic and geopolitical interest. To counter this, Britain aggressively expanded opium exports from India, leveraging the drug's addictive properties to reverse the silver drain. Kind of sounds familiar today with the fentanyl that's coming into the United States. As opium addiction surged in China, silver flowed back to Britain, sustaining tea imports without further depleting reserves. Alarmed by the social devastation, widespread addiction, declining public health, and moral decay, again, that sounds familiar. We have communities throughout the United States that are afflicted by the addictive nature of fentanyl. The Qing government moved to suppress the opium trade. The United States government is moving to suppress the fentanyl trade. In 1839, Chinese authorities seized British opium stockpiles and restricted foreign merchants, sparking a crisis. Britain responded with military force, launching the First Opium War. China's defeat led to unequal treaties granting Britain trade privileges, war reparations, and control over Hong Kong. Mercantilism, a doctrine promoting national wealth through trade surpluses, bullion accumulation, and state-managed commerce using tariffs, subsidies, monopolies, and colonial exploitation, was fundamentally flawed. It falsely treated trade as a zero-sum game, ignoring Ricardo's principle of comparative advantage, which shows that all nations gain from trade. Inflows of gold and silver led to domestic inflation and eroded export competitiveness. Monopolies, royal licenses granting exclusive rights to buy or sell specific goods, distorted markets. For most goods, monopolists typically restrict output to raise prices along downward sloping demand. However, mercantilist subsidies and tariffs sometimes incentivized overproduction to dominate trade or meet strategic aims. In the case of addictive goods, such as the East India Company's opium exports to China, monopolists could increase both prices and output. Addiction artificially inflates demand, causing supply to exceed efficient market levels. These practices, combined with collusion between the state, merchants, and landlords, encourage rent-seeking, corruption, feudal stagnation, and economic inequality, resulting in significant deadweight loss. Mercantilist rivalries intensified geopolitical conflicts, fueling wars, which I have a list of European wars below, that may have delivered short-term state power but led to long-term inefficiency, inflation, persistent instability, violating the principles of comparative advantage, market efficiency, and price adjustment. As you can see, Europe has a long history of world war. As you read Mercantilism, a lesson for our times, fill in the missing words and phrases in the following excerpts of this article.